My name is Ni. I was once a university student with fierce pride and a deep passion for interior design. But life isn't a smooth blueprint drawn on paper. My family was trapped in a suffocating poverty that clung to every failed harvest my parents endured. By my sophomore year, when tuition and model-making expenses became boulders crushing my parents' thin shoulders, I dropped out to work. I told myself it was just a pause, that I would earn money in the city to fund my dreams, yet the brutal grind of blue-collar labor, sleepless night shifts, and the cold indifference of the city drained the last spark of light from my eyes. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a pale, haggard girl, helpless, lonely, and completely burned out. I returned to the countryside, to the dilapidated house at the foot of the mountain where my grandparents had lived their entire lives. Stepping inside, I was greeted by the musty scent of time and abandonment. My parents weren't home. They were working deep in the mountain clearings, only able to return a few times a year. The house had stood empty for years, walls moss-covered, roof tiles displaced, sitting silently in the biting mountain wind. My first night on the old creaking bed. Darkness wrapped around me like it wanted to swallow me whole. I pulled the thin blanket to my neck and wept for my thwarted youth, for my buried dreams, and out of pure self-pity, because I didn't even have my parents' comforting embrace when I stumbled and fell. But when the weak morning sun filtered through the gaps in the tiles, I knew that if I continued to break down, both this house and I would rot away together. I had to stand up and renovate this home with my own hands, to find a reason to breathe and a shelter to weather the freezing winters of my life. Built in an old-fashioned architecture, the house had tiny windows that left the interior cramped and starved for light. As a former design student, this dark space weighed heavily on my heart. So I decided to do something I never imagined a physically frail girl would dare attempt: widening the window. Borrowing a chisel and a heavy hammer, I climbed onto a makeshift scaffold to chip away at the decades-old wattle and daub walls. Every blow kicked up suffocating dust that stung my lungs and made me cough violently. My hands, accustomed only to sketching pens, were soon blistered and bleeding. Yet my university knowledge awakened. I knew mud walls had poor load-bearing capacity. To keep the structure from collapsing, I figured out how to install a horizontal lintel beam above before widening the opening below. To save my pitifully small budget, I scavenged intact bricks from old houses being demolished in the village, pushing wheelbarrows heavy with debris that sliced bleeding scratches into my skin. But in those moments of loneliness, I realized this poor countryside wasn't as cold as I thought. The neighbors, hard-working farmers weathered by the mountain sun, saw this skinny girl pushing messy wheelbarrows. Uncle Bay and Uncle Tu rushed over, scolding me affectionately. "Good Lord, a young girl trying to play bricklayer. If your parents out in the fields knew, their hearts would break." Without another word, they rolled up their sleeves to help. In the city, my construction internships were just checking blueprints. Laying bricks was all theory to me, what locals call having seen a pig run without ever tasting pork. When I tried it myself, the mortar lines were jagged and distorted. Uncle Bay chuckled, took the trowel, and guided me step by step. "You have to interlock the bricks on both sides of the window frame to bear the load, girl." Watching their hunched backs diligently tapping each brick into place under the afternoon sun, my eyes stung. Their unconditional kindness soothed my heart. As the window widened and the light flooded the room, a ray of light seemed to slip into my weary soul. Next, I built 2 wooden doors for the entrance. Surrounded by wilderness, village elders warned me that wild boars had been coming down the mountain looking for food. Shivering at the thought of facing the wilderness alone, I went to the local sawmill and selected 1.5 centimeters thick firwood, the sturdy lumber used for bed slats to ensure solid security. While I was struggling with the heavy planks and unfamiliar tools, my father suddenly came home for a visit. Wearing ragged, mud-stained clothes that smelled of exhausting labor, he saw me thin and scratched up as I sawed through wood. A rural man who didn't know how to speak sweet words of comfort. He quietly turned away with a choked sigh and expressed his heartbreak through actions. During his brief 2-day stay, he took over the heaviest manual task, teaching me how to measure angles, drill joints, and plane rough edges smooth. To protect the timber, we sat on the porch floor and meticulously brushed coats of dog walnut wood wax oil onto the wood. In the fading afternoon, looking at my father's calloused, cracked hands, I felt a physical ache in my chest. He had given me life and paid for my schooling, yet I had returned as a burden. As he hurriedly packed to return to the harvest, he pressed a crumpled 200,000 dong bill into my hand, his voice raspy. "Be careful working around the house. Remember to bolt the door at night. If you run out of money, just tell me." I stood dazed, watching his silhouette fade down the slope, tears trapping the grief in my throat. With the doors finished, I entered the most labor-intensive stage, treating the interior walls. Plastering is required to hide wiring and fix cracks, but doing it by hand was an ordeal. After plastering, you must continuously spray the wall with water for 3 days so the mortar doesn't develop hairline cracks. Every day, I lugged heavy buckets of water from the well. Watching the plaster soak up water, my mind sank into chaotic thoughts. The house's walls were just like my life, a patchwork applied unevenly. Inevitably, when the foundation isn't smooth, the layer of putty scraped over it can never be sleek. I bitterly realized the cruel parallel. Laying a solid foundation from the beginning is everything. I lacked a secure financial foundation, and I lost my educational foundation when I dropped out. No wonder my adult life turned out rough, coarse, and easily peeling. Scraping wall putty exhausted me. The old houses here all had crumbling lime-washed walls, while slagged lime works over dry putty, brushing my mixture directly onto ancient lime walls caused the entire layer to blister and flake off within days. Seeing my labor turn into white debris at my feet, I sat in the corner and sobbed uncontrollably. But I picked myself up, decided to scrape off all the old lime, and sanded the wall thoroughly. A large sanding scraper proved counterproductive for my weak arms, so I grabbed a small trowel and patiently scraped away inch by inch. In a room cloudy with dust, I chose the slowest, most meticulous method to temper the patience of my storm-tossed soul. On afternoons, when my arms were numb and the white dust coated my lips, I comforted myself. Just sit here for now, take a deep breath, everything will pass. Looking out the new window at the spring wind rustling the trees, I silently wished that everyone, my parents in the fields, and anyone struggling out there, stays healthy. Happy New Year! A new year for a fresh beginning from the ashes. When the walls were wider, the emptiness reminded me of my poverty. I had no money for furniture, so I found myself building a table out of the old wooden door I had unhinged earlier. Having a proper table makes daily life much more convenient. At least I'd have a place to eat cold rice without crawling on the freezing floor. I spent hours prying off rusted locks and using pliers to pull out bent nails embedded deep in the wood. As I sanded away layers of mold in the yard, mountain weather showed its cruel unpredictability. It suddenly poured rain and the temperature plummeted. I gritted my teeth and dragged the heavy door inside out of the wet. Making the table legs presented a real challenge. I wanted to repurpose the old door frame, but when I scraped off the mortar, I was heartbroken to see termites had ravaged it. The core was crumbling into sawdust. Disappointed, I found some solid old desert wood sitting in the shed, perfect for table legs. Turning on an online tutorial, the instructor's voice echoed in the empty house. Please listen carefully, lift it up, and push forward. I tried my best to follow along, the sounds of sawing echoing through the neighborhood. Uncle Tu stopped outside the fence and called out, "Hey, little boss, why are you out working in the cold wind? What are you making over there?" I gave him a weary, tearful smile. At first, driven by pride, I planned to use a mortise and a tenon joint structure for a traditional look. But holding the chisel, my trembling hands butchered the wood fibers. I realized I was chiseling like a dog, scratching miserably at the wood. Unwilling to waste the precious timber, I abandoned the illusions of perfection and used iron screws and side brackets to secure the legs directly to the door plank for a quick, sturdy fix. Because desert wood is pale, I brushed dark walnut wax oil onto the legs to match the old door. I used the metal connecting plates screwed tightly underneath to bind the door's two planks into a wide, flat surface. The fir wood door itself was so thick and heavy that its sheer weight kept the tabletop stable without needing extra angle brackets. I told myself with a self-deprecating humor that unless someone had enough free time to stand on the edge and do high jumps, the tabletop would never warp or wobble. The final step was applying a protective coat of wood wax oil over the entire surface. By now, the temperature had dropped so low that the damp freezing air caused the wax oil to freeze up, becoming sticky and unable to dry. I ran into the bedroom, grabbed my old hairdryer, and patiently stood blowing hot air into every corner of the table so the wax would melt and seep into the rough wood fibers. The heat released a scent of old timber mingled with fragrant wax, filling the tiny room. I turned off the hairdryer. The house returned to the quiet of the mountains, with only the sound of rain pattering against the roof tiles. I pulled up a worn wooden chair and slowly sat down in front of my new table, a patchwork table made from an unhinged door, legs sawed from shed timber, bound together by crude screws because I didn't know joinery. I rested my forehead on the tabletop, still warm from the hairdryer, my calloused, bleeding fingers tracing the rough wood grain. At 24, no degree, no career, no lavish city parties. I only had this old house, slowly being mended by my own sweat, tears, and blood. Loneliness and self-pity linger in my chest, bitter like strong winter tea. But looking at the whitened window, letting in light, hearing the warm barking of dogs from Uncle Bay and Uncle Tu's houses, and thinking of my parents working tirelessly in the fields, I knew I wasn't allowed to give up. This house was healing day by day, and perhaps the battered soul of this 24-year-old girl named Ni would also begin to heal, right here in this poor yet peaceful countryside.